Parents across the country have been forced to work from home while juggling their children's online learning, leading to increased stress and anxiety among many families. With more on this, I want to bring in Roger McIntyre and Amy Fox. Roger is a psychiatry and pharmacology professor at the U of T and head of the Mood Disorders Psychopharmacological Unit at University Health Network. Amy's an executive at Kimberly-Clark Canada and a mom of two boys, but she's got four in the house, and she's going to tell us about that. Amy and Roger, good morning to both of you. So glad you could be part of this conversation. So, Amy, you've got two boys. Your partner has two boys, so that makes four, all between the ages of 5 and 11. So you're trying to do school and work. I'm getting anxious just explaining this. What's it been like for you?
It's getting anxious hearing you explain it. I would say it's been interesting for sure, without question. I'd also say that it's something that, has evolved and has changed over the course of the pandemic. As I reflect back on the early days, those were undoubtedly the hardest. We were so incredibly busy with work that truthfully, we had to let the kids fend for themselves. And I realized really early on how much children depended on structure. And frankly, it was something that we could just not provide for them at that point in time. And, they didn't understand that we needed to work, and they had needs, their kids. So they would be busting in here all the time while I was on calls and in meetings. And when they weren't busting in here, they were sucking up all the internet. So I was getting booted out of my meeting. So, it felt like an impossible situation at first. And we struggled to find the time to feed them, let alone teach them anything. And we felt awful because it felt like, you're failing as a parent. But as I fast forward till now, I will say that the structure that has come from online learning has definitely helped. The 3 older boys have adapted, and they're working relatively independently, although you got to check in on them. And the 5-year-old, anybody who's FaceTimed with a 5-year-old would probably know what that looks like, but he's happy and we let the rest go. I still feel like we're running a 24-hour cafeteria and tech support hub, but we're making it through.
Okay, before I get to you, Roger, and I do want to get to you, I just am wondering, Amy, if there was a word that you could describe how you feel, what would it be? Because a lot of what you're expressing is kind of outward, and I was wondering how you feel inside trying to juggle all this.
Overwhelmed. I would say would be the first word that would come to mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Roger, on that note, I'm sure this is a story, the contours of which you have heard before. What do you say to people like her that are struggling with this or getting better at it, but still having that sense of feeling overwhelmed? What are you hearing in your office and beyond?
Well, first, let me just react by saying I think we have to have a new order of Canada for moms across the country, a collective order of Canada deserve it, I think, immediately. And I appreciate Amy's comments, and I've heard it so often. And I think that sense of being overwhelmed captures it. And the word structure, Amy, that you also mentioned really resonates with me. There's no doubt about it that working from home for many people has been a convenience. It's been a quality of life enhancement. They can list about half a dozen reasons why they like it. But for most, or certainly many people, this is not the case. They've got so many things that they're trying to tackle. I think that needs to be registered. I think it's extremely difficult for people to manage all of this. And as I was hearing it as well, I was sort of thinking, wow, that's a lot on the plate. There's been many surveys conducted across our country and other countries as well that provide a very consistent message that unfortunately working from home has been very difficult, especially for women. And we're hearing about people having very high rates of anxiety, lots of difficulties getting their rest, lots of difficulties even being productive. So productivity actually, unfortunately, has been compromised for many, not all people. So this is why I like the word structure, and easier to say than do, but we have to start with a commitment to structure and really try to remember that to get through this, it's about resiliency. Resiliency is a tough thing. They say, how can we roll with all this? And among other things, what is really strongly recommended is to find outlets. outlets where you find joy and pleasure. Frankly, we need timeouts to ourselves to sort of, to regroup, to recalibrate, just to decompress. Not as easy in the colder days, everything's shut down and so on and so on. But this is where social connection comes in. I'm glad the Prime Minister mentioned that in that clip you showed, because I've been hearing from a lot of people having chats, having groups, having internet-based connections with people just to share, their experiences, have that support with other colleagues and other moms. That's been extraordinarily resiliency enhancing, probably underemphasizing. A lot of people feel guilty they're feeling this way. They should actually just realize this is common and reach out to others and find ways to connect.
Amy, have you done that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Connecting with friends, family, colleagues, I'd even say having children in the room makes you a lot closer to your colleagues, right? So it's been a big part of my coping mechanism, of course.
Roger, do we have a sense yet what the full mental health impact is of this pandemic on people, on families?
We don't, because of the dynamic and ongoing nature of this. There's two words that have come to mind for me as this has unfolded and just seems to go on and go on. And those two words are malignant uncertainty. When is this thing going to end? And we're now hearing about variants. We're hearing about, some of the rollout of the vaccine and some of the interruption in the supply chain. This is only adding to distress. And I think everyone's beginning to feel very distressed, overwhelmed, and frankly fed up of how long this is going on. So I think we don't have the full tally. What I can say is that we have a tally already, which is more than enough that we need to deal with. You probably saw that, there's been a survey again in the last 24 hours here in Ontario. Our healthcare workers, who are disproportionately women, often moms, in the nursing profession, reporting staggering levels of distress in what they're doing and so on. So this is an ongoing issue. It's a very dynamic and very fluid issue. And I think what's important to highlight here is that we need to be remembering that this will have an endpoint. It's not about denial, it's about deferral. And what I mean by that is we're deferring till later, where we're going to be back together and do things again. But there's much that we can do. Our government's trying to help us with different provisions on the economic side, of course, trying to get these vaccines rolled out. At the same time, we need to be self-effective. What that means is take control, impose the structure, do what we can to build our resiliency. And I don't think it's a done deal that life has to be so miserable for everybody. I think we can do what we can to really vaccine ourselves against the mental health challenges that we're dealing with. So all the basics, good sleep, portion control with respect to food and alcohol, of course, get some exercise. And I always emphasize this point. We've talked about this so often. We need portion control with social media as well. Not too much of that, because too much can be, unfortunately, can cause a lot of people some anxiety. But again, let's come back to that point I said earlier about reconnecting. That's the most powerful resiliency-enhancing strategy, to connect with people, to try and, in fact, do this together.
Amy, final line or two from you for all of the women out there who are watching and identifying with you in a really big way. What do you say?
Hey, I mean, it's been super hard to see women out there, especially, friends I have who've been brilliant at their work, who've had to take a step back and a leave of absence because, they can't handle the stress. I would say if I had one piece of advice, take time for yourself every single day. My worst days are the days where I look back and I'm like, I did not do a single thing for myself. And I know as a mother, that's really hard to find the time to fit it in, but you got to do it. And for me, it's an hour in the morning of exercise. And at the end of the day, doing something that brings me joy. A lot of the things that Roger listed, and, stay strong, stay positive.
Really valuable conversation. I appreciate both of you, psychiatry professor Roger McIntyre and executive and mom Amy Fox. Thank you and all the best to both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for covering the topic.